Hello and welcome to On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. On June 19th, 2019, I released the episode of And the Runner-Up Is on the 1964 Best Picture race, where we discussed Mary Poppins as the likely runner-up that lost Best Picture to My Fair Lady. But on second thought, what if the runner-up was really Becket? Hello and welcome back to On Second Thought, where we discuss another Best Picture nominee that we did not cover as the runner-up on the main show and discuss whether it may have actually been the runner-up. I'm your host, Kevin Jacobson, and we are revisiting 1964 today. So on the main show, I said that Mary Poppins was the runner-up to My Fair Lady, but today we are discussing if it actually could have been a very different film, and that film is Becket. And joining me today is someone that you last heard not too long ago talking with me on an episode of For My Consideration about Baghdad Cafe. He is a Sporkle curator, a great contributor to our little corner of film Twitter. Please welcome back to the show, Christof.
Hello, thank you for having me back on this episode for a film quite different to Baghdad Cafe, and I'm looking forward to talk about it to you.
Yes, same. I'm very excited to get into the shenanigans of Peter O'Toole and his yelling. Let's just jump right into a summary here. Becket is a historical drama about the relationship between King Henry II of England and his friend and Archbishop Thomas Becket, and it explores how the two of them were friends, getting into their little adventures together, even when Henry was King of England, and how he appointed Becket to Lord Chancellor and then eventually the Archbishop of Canterbury. And during that time, Becket wields quite a bit of power and makes some enemies, and things really kick into high gear when Becket sends away one of Henry's very loyal friends after a scandal, which causes a big rift between Henry and Becket. And so Becket flees after Henry tries to frame him for embezzlement, and it's a whole mess. So the film was directed by Peter Glenville and written by Edward Anhalt, who adapted the stage play of the same name by Jean Anouilh, and it stars two of the biggest Oscar losers in history, Richard Burton as Thomas Becket and Peter O'Toole as King Henry. And there's a whole cast around them, but they don't get a whole lot to do. But we do have John Gielgud as King Louis. We have Pamela Brown as Eleanor of Aquitaine, but very much a two-hander with Richard and Peter. And Becket made $9 million at the U.S. box office, and it was nominated for 12 Academy Awards, winning one, but that one was not Best Picture. Okay, Christof, so let us just jump right in here. Tell me your relationship to Becket. I don't know how many times you've seen it, but what are your thoughts on this film?
Well, Becket, my relationship with Becket is a strange one in that case, that for the most time, or for the longest time, Becket was a very elusive film that I never had the chance to see. I started getting into movies in the mid-1990s, I would say, when I was a teenager, and I was watching a lot of movies on TV when they aired. I was videotaping movies that aired at night and watched them the next day after school. And so I slowly built up a back catalog of old movies I watched and developed the taste for a certain kind of old movie. And I had movie encyclopedias, and sometime I discovered the IMDb, and I began actually making lists of films that I want to watch at some point. And I'm fairly certain that Becket was on the very first list that I wrote. It must have been on one of the first lists. Not because I thought I would really love this movie, but just because of its pedigree and because of the Oscar nominations it got and because of Peter O'Toole and Richard Burton in it. But somehow Beckett for many years never crossed my path. It was never on TV in Germany, even although not even on big holidays when some TV stations love airing old historical epics. It was never in the one video store in the town I lived in where I kept renting VHSs and later DVDs. And when I moved to a bigger city, it wasn't in any of the video stores there. It was never in the very beautiful repertoire theater where I watched many classics for the first time. So it was a film I was looking out for a long time, but somehow it did not exist in Germany because maybe films about medieval British history weren't all that interesting for the German market, even with these actors in it. And I looked it up actually. It was released on DVD in Germany in 2008. So I was 26 when I watched it for the first time. I had more than 10 years of obsessive movie watching behind me, and I went into it with a very firm set of expectations. I thought this is a grand historical epic. This is exquisite production design, fantastic performances, but I also expected it to be a bit tedious. Like, for my expectation or my experience, grand historical epics, especially if they aren't all that popular as I thought it was, tend to be. And when I actually watched it, I was kind of surprised how much I liked it. I wasn't bored a bit. I really enjoyed the performance in it. And my takeaway was that it was actually a lot better than I expected it to be.
Yeah, and has that sort of maintained even in rewatches?
It actually has. I haven't rewatched it very often. It's not
Yeah.
one of the films that I say, "Oh wow, Beckett, I need to watch that again." It's
This
not
two
one of
and a
my
half
very
hour historical
favorites.
drama. Yeah.
But when I do rewatch it, I always say it's a film. When I rewatch it, it was better than I remembered it to be, or better than it was in my memory, because I was really it was better written than I expected it to be, even although I had seen it before.
Yeah. Well, this is my second time watching it. The first time was actually just for the Best Picture series. But I will also note that it's kind of hard to really talk about this film and not also bring up The Lion in Winter, which also has Peter O'Toole playing the same character of King Henry. And that film is definitely one of my favorites, especially because I love just how irreverent it is, especially for the time period, and really playing around with what's fact, what's fiction. I personally don't mind when a film has a concrete perspective and a reason for playing with the truth, and I do think that that is what The Lion in Winter is doing and what Becket is doing to a lesser extent, but still playing around with things. Obviously, Lion in Winter is much more sort of bold and funny with its style, but I do think that that's what makes both of them surprisingly fun to watch, considering, it's a historical genre.
I think there even is a through line there because not
Yep.
only is Peter O'Toole playing the same character, there are also some scenes. If you watch Becket and do not know that Becket was made before The Lion in Winter, that almost feel a bit like references when King Henry talks about his children as royal vermin or says, "I don't like my children very much." This almost feels like it recalls what actually happened later in The Lion in Winter.
Right. They do feel very spiritually connected in that regard. But yeah, I certainly would prefer Lion in Winter to watch that film just because that's so juicy. But I
Same.
think what I really responded to with Becket is that this is not setting out, as a lot of historical dramas do, to say that this happened and then this happened and then this happened and that's the story of Becket and King Henry. you know, this is much more personal and, centered on these two characters as people. And it's like the actual plot and the things moving around them aren't as important, and the historical accuracy isn't as important compared to just what these two people are experiencing and feeling and sort of how their relationship changes. And so I do prefer that kind of take on historical figures, even if it's not fully truthful. They're not giving you just like a visual representation of something that you could just easily read in a book, you know. It's delving into what these two men kind of meant to each other on a personal level, and yes, there's some homoerotic tension happening just all over this movie, I would say. And a big part of that, I would say, is also the way that Peter O'Toole chooses to play Henry in a more like flamboyant way, not like a stereotype, but he just wants excitement in his life, and he loves having Becket around, at least in the beginning, because he just has so much fun with him, you know. And then when Becket actually decides to do something that Henry doesn't like, it's like they're basically in a lover's quarrel, you know. And Henry just takes it really personally, and he's just like, I want him dead, in that way that you would feel about like an ex, you know.
But, very much so. And I mean,
but it's like, also, don't you dare talk bad about him, anyone else. Like, I'm the only one that can feel this way.
Yes. I mean, sometimes I have a feeling that there's a tendency among gay people to watch movies in which two characters of the same sex have a cordial relationship, and we say, oh, there are homoerotic tendencies. And sometimes I lean back and say, is there really, or are you just seeing something that isn't there? Sometimes two people of the same sex can be friends without any homoerotic tendencies. However, the first time we actually see those two together, Peter O'Toole is shirtless, coming out of the bath, and is rubbed dry by Richard Burton, and we later hear him say, "I loved you," and this is so obvious subtext. It's almost text, not even subtext, that there are homoerotic tendencies, and that this is supposed to be there. And clearly, Peter O'Toole is definitely in on it. I certainly believe Richard Burton as well, although in his character, it's not as important to show it as in Peter O'Toole's, that where the relationship between the two men, which is not quite a friendship. On the one hand, it's more than a friendship because there are these tendencies. On the other hand, I would say it's less than a friendship as well, because they are not on the same level. There are several times that when Peter O'Toole refers, or when King Henry refers to Becket as a friend, and Becket refers to himself as a servant to Henry. So they are not on the same level. Henry calls it a friendship. Henry thinks of it as a friendship. I don't think Becket really thinks of it as a friendship in the same way that Henry means it, or that we think a friendship should be. But there's certainly this component that there's more to it than just a platonic friendship between two men who enjoy spending time together.
Right, exactly. And I just think that that's a fun way of approaching this relationship that these two men had, where it does sort of feel like, I agree on Henry's part, it's more for him, this close relationship that's somewhere between a friendship and like an actual relationship. But that is the crux of the conflict, is that, you know, Becket doesn't really feel quite that way. And obviously there's this, you know, not historically accurate sense of Becket wasn't even a Saxon, he was actually a Norman. Like, the actual drama of the story, though, is what matters. You know, I don't know if they make it super clear that this isn't really supposed to be taken as gospel. You know, I do think it sort of toes the line between that very traditional stodgy drama about royals, and then also this kind of heightened melodrama that's sort of bending the truth. So yeah, I don't know how audiences really took it in 1964, whether they believe that this is a true unfolding of what really happened. But I do think from today's standards, I don't know about you, but I do think it's somewhat obvious as the film goes on that they're clearly, you know, having a lot of fun with the material, more so than trying to just stick to the truth of how everything went down.
Yes, I think that this is what makes this film stick out among other historical epics. And I think it has the advantage that it is set in a medieval time when we don't have that many sources anyway. So they have a lot of wiggle room to maybe twist the facts a bit, because maybe it was that way after all, but they're certainly reveling in it and forming the characters in a way that we are probably indeed not meant to think that they were literally like that, but they could have been like that. And it would have been interesting if they were like that.
Yes, right. So, yeah, I mean, overall, I definitely don't love this film just because I also think it's a little on the long side. I think it does sort of draw things out a little too much, like, especially with some of the ceremonial stuff. Like, do we really need to see all of this slow procedural stuff with, like, the religious ceremonies and people just slowly walking through buildings? I don't know. It's kind of drawn out, but again, there is something in the tone and especially in the performances that really does bring it to life, and it does help that we get to really see the both of them sort of reveling in their situation. Like, they're going off on horses together and going through town and waking up in weird places. Well, now that I think about it, actually, maybe audiences were sort of in the mood for a film like this after, like, Tom Jones the year before. Obviously, that's more like farcical and not a great film in my opinion, but it's the kind of like irreverent humor that you see a little bit here. And yeah, I mean, we have like these scenes where the subtext is pretty much just text where they're like rubbing each other down literally. And Henry's like, oh, no one does it like you do. What's interesting though is I think, I don't think it's really winking to the audience in the way that kind of Tom Jones does. I don't think it's meant to create this feeling of like, oh, the two of them clearly have feelings for each other. It's two men. How funny, There's more of a cleverness to how it sort of weaves in those feelings, at least at the beginning of the intimacy,
It's clearly there, but I think that there is a way that you could watch this film and completely ignore it and not be aware of it happening if you're not prone to seeing it or prone to expecting it. So I don't think that back in 1964 when it came out, this was the first thing on people's mind, on the broad public's mind when they were watching it.
Right. I think the only part that really touches on a little bit of like a panic feeling, like gay panic, a little bit, is when Henry's mother is like, she's just like, the friendship that the two of you have is unnatural, which is in the context of him just like going totally mad by the end of the film. And yeah, I mean, it sort of tracks. Like, clearly you're obsessed with this person, so. Yeah, but I think at the heart of the film, it is kind of like this interesting sort of love story where the two of them were seemingly the best of friends, but also there is that element of the two of them being, Henry is a Norman, Becket is a Saxon, and the Normans, they've made the Saxons into this oppressed group at the time, basically, and it's like there's always that dividing line between them. For as much fun as they have together, there is that tension, at least on Becket's end, like this uneasiness. And the whole thing also towards the beginning where Henry says, like, everyone predicted that Becket would put a knife in my back. It's sort of for good reason that people thought that because of what the Saxons had gone through. And then, we have these moments where Becket has this mistress, Gwendolen, and Henry ends up being very, like, coveting of her and sort of requests her for the night. And it's this really weird sort of power dynamic moment. And they have to oblige because he's the king, but then she takes her own life. And it's like Henry is just always trying to covet just more and more and just conquer everything. But then Becket also has these sort of convictions, and he is also a religious person. So which Henry can sometimes forget amid all the fun and the sort of frivolity of everything, that Becket is still this very serious man who has these convictions. So, yeah, I think it does sort of set up this pretty juicy conflict that really, I think both of the actors are just really well cast as these characters. I think two excellent performances from the both of them.
Yes, there are very different performances, because on the one hand you have Richard Burton as Becket, who his character has the central conflict. On the one hand is his loyalty to the king, to King Henry, which Henry thinks is a friendship, which Becket himself talks of more as he's the servant. There are scenes early in the film when Becket is clearly displeased with what Henry is doing. When he is how he is treating others, and you see that Becket is standing by and he doesn't like it, but he's not speaking up, because maybe his loyalty is the loyalty of a servant, someone who will do what Henry wants him to do, but who will not speak up to him. But later, when he gets authority in his own right, because Henry gave it to him, but he has a position of power, his own principles become more important to him. And he has this conflict of his loyalty to Henry, which is still there, and his principles and the loyalty to the new position he is having, his loyalty to the church, which he is now having, which he somehow has to find a way to navigate it. And when the first time he is basically going against Henry, which I assume something never happened before, that Henry, when Becket was still his servant, the first time Becket does something that Henry doesn't like, he just realizes that this friendship, or more than friendship, isn't going the way it is. Peter O'Toole, on the other hand, doesn't really have such kind of conflict. He is playing just a grand character, character of a lot of charisma. He is shouting a lot, but I don't think that the kind of Peter O'Toole shouting is not the shouting to intimidate others. It feels more like he is shouting those words because he likes exclaiming those words. It's this very unique acting style which really serves the character perfectly. He is doing a lot. He's giving a bigger performance than Burton has the chance to give, and he is really sinking his teeth into it, and it's really a joy to watch him here.
I do almost wonder about just like the awards campaign for both of them. I think there was some quote, I think, from either, I'm not sure which one said it, but they said that neither of us have a chance because we're both in the same category basically in Best Actor. But it is like they're doing such different things. But the things that Peter O'Toole is doing is, ironically, I think it's less challenging than what Richard Burton is being asked to do. And yet I do think Peter O'Toole probably would just get more votes naturally, even though the film is called Becket. There's just such a obvious over-the-top nature of what Peter O'Toole is doing that I feel like the Academy tends to gravitate to that.
I mean, even I, on some level, would agree that what Richard Burton is doing is harder, but still I feel myself being drawn more to this thing that Peter O'Toole is doing on an emotional level. I wish I would be able to say, oh, Burton is obviously much better because doing the more intimate things, but maybe I'm just so shallow that Peter O'Toole impresses me with what he's doing. I just love watching him. I just love listening to the words pouring out of his mouth.
Thank you for listening to this preview of On Second Thought, a bonus series from And the Runner-Up Is. If you liked what you heard and want to hear more, please go to patreon.com/andtherunnerup-is and become a patron. Only $3 a month will get you access to bonus episodes, a Slack channel, and early access to regular episodes. Thank you so much for your consideration.